Hola tout le monde! Before we get into the complete dismantellation of PragerU and Richard Kemp's blatant propaganda, I just want to take a moment to share a few details about them. Dennis Prager, the founder of PragerU, is a former radio conservative talk show host who was raised in Brooklyn, New York as a self-proclaimed modern orthodox Jew. That could be code for Zionist Jew, I'm just not sure. And as for Richard Kemp, who is a retired British Army officer, who is also a longtime member of Christians United for Israel, who has become a major spokesperson for the far-right branches of Israeli politics, who even has no problems going as far as to throw a tantrum when Israel is asked to follow international law.
But that United Nations Security Council resolution bans any further settlement of Jews in that area of Palestine. How can that be?
It should also be noted that Kemp has received an honorary doctorate from the Israeli University Bar Ilan for his shameless support, no doubt. Now that you have an idea what we're getting into, I hope you enjoy the destruction of Kemp and PragerU propaganda.
There are two views of the Israeli military, what you hear in most of the media and the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth.
Oh yeah, you can count on getting the truth from somebody who claims that Israel is perfect.
I have to disagree with Robert Singer. He said that Israel is not perfect. Israel is perfect.
I was the commander of British forces in Afghanistan. I have fought in combat zones around the world, including Northern Ireland, Bosnia, Macedonia, and Iraq. I was also present throughout the conflict in Gaza in 2014. Based on my experience and on my observations, the Israel Defense Force, the IDF, does more to safeguard the rights of civilians in a combat zone than any other army in the history of warfare. Why is this so? Firstly, Israel is a decent country with Western values run on democratic principles.
I never realized that Western values were so apartheid. Like Jewish-only settlements, Jewish-only roads, with segregation in schools, even hospitals, and even a majority against the right to vote, for some that is. Clearly all such decent principles.
Israel has no more interest in war than Belgium does.
It's only recently you said of Israel, it's a crazy country, it's like a junkie. Every few years they go to war, they need their fix, they're lunatics. American Jews don't want to defend that.
Yeah, Israel is carrying on in a lunatic fashion. I would like to ask you...
And Hezbollah, who you went to meet?
I would like to ask you, name me another country in the world. 2003, Israel was the cheerleaders for the war in Iraq. 2006, it went into war in Lebanon. 2008, 2009, it attacked Gaza. Now it talks about attacking Iran. If you read the Israeli papers every day, they talk about, should we attack Gaza? Should we attack Lebanon? Should we attack Syria? Name me another country in the world that falls into that category.
Well,
that's a lunatic state.
In fact, Israel has never started a war.
Bullshit.
According to Zeev Maoz, a former academic director at the IDF College, who displays in his book that every Israeli war was a war of choice, that were entirely avoidable and the result of deliberate Israeli aggression, with the possible exception of the 1948 War of Independence. If anyone has any doubts about Israel's actions to start wars, all one needs to do is to look into the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel attacked and wiped out the unprepared Egyptian Air Force resulting in 0 casualty for the Israeli pilots. And of course, like all other wars of aggression that Israel starts, they refer to them as preemptive strikes, as if that somehow justifies them. Also, let us never forget the USS Liberty.
The only reason it ever goes to war is to defend itself.
Right. With the exception of the 1948 war, I challenge anybody to find me one single time that another nation attacked Israel first. Just once.
And it has to defend itself because, unlike Belgium, it is surrounded by countries and armed groups that want to destroy it. Secondly, Judaism, with its unsurpassed moral standards.
Mas Shabbat 31b. On the house of the Goy, one looks as on the fold of cattle. Yebamoth 98a. All children of the Goyim are animals. Baba Messiah 114b. The Goyim are not humans, they are beasts.
Remains a major influence on the citizens of Israel.
אתם קרואים בהמות, כתוב, אתם קרואים מאוד ואין הם קרואים מאוד.
זהו, אבל לא הם בהמות.
נכון, לא כתוב שהם
אבל
בהמות.
יש לזה הסבר על זה, נכון? למה הם...
רגע, זה מה שאני רוצה להבין. רגע, שקט. אז מי, כן, מה כתוב? זה מה שאני לא מבין.
כתוב שאתם קרואים אדם, והגויים לא קרואים אדם, זה מה שכתוב.
לא קרואים?
לא קרואים אדם, לא קוראים להם אדם.
אוקיי, אז מה קוראים להם?
אדם זה אדם אל העליון.
אדם הוא בן אדם שהוא שונה מהבהמה.
I say this as a non-Jew. Thirdly, the army is composed overwhelmingly of citizen soldiers.
Settlers believe they have a divine right to the land in the West Bank and Jerusalem and see themselves as the flame holders of Israel's future. These nationalists are also religious fundamentalists.
Every single place and in every single land, every little spot, everything is the Jews. Not a single piece for other people, only for us. And we won't give anybody else, just for us. That's what we believe.
There's plenty of talk about revenge against the Palestinians. At times they appear like a sectarian football mob.
Israel's a small country with a small professional army. To fight a war, it depends on its conscripts and its reservists. These are ordinary citizens, from professors to plumbers, called upon to defend their homes. They don't want to be fighting, and they don't want to harm others.
What will bring our redemption is not prayer. What will bring redemption is war. But today we're going in exactly the opposite direction. Instead of war, there's peace now. There's an attempt to prevent war at all costs. And if we can force the army to go back to being offensive, an army of revenge, an army which cares about Jews more than anybody else, then we'll be able to bring the final redemption in the only way possible, through war. War now.
Nowhere was the essential morality and decency of the IDF more evident than in the Gaza war of 2014.
Oh yeah, the 2014 bombing of Gaza. That was so brutal, even some of their biggest propagandists had no choice but to speak out.
Hamas's rockets, since 2001, 13 years ago, have killed a total of 28 Israelis. Just in the past week alone, Israeli airstrikes on Gaza have killed, at time of making this video, 227 Palestinians, most of them innocent people, and around half of them women and children. So in just the past week alone, Israel has killed 10 times the amount of Palestinians in 1 week. in comparison to Hamas rocket attacks for the previous 13 years since 2001? Is that a proportionate response? Is that justified vengeance? Is that a legitimate degree of self-defense?
If ever there was a purely defensive war, this was it. The war was started by Hamas.
Was it? Was it really, though? At the time, we're told it was because of the kidnapping of 3 Israeli teens.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu joins us next. Israel's military has been rounding up politicians or operatives linked with Hamas. That military operation on the West Bank came after the kidnapping of 3 Israeli teenagers. Prime Minister Netanyahu, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Steve.
Much to discuss here. We'll dive right in. You've said you have proof that Hamas is behind the kidnappings, and Israelis as well as Palestinians have been saying, okay, show us the evidence. Can you describe the evidence you have?
Well, we've pretty much figured out who are the kidnappers, the actual perpetrators, the supporters, the command structure, and there's no question these are members of Hamas. We've passed some of that information to the U.S. government, and others will make it public as soon as the investigation enables us to do that. My number one goal right now is to bring back our 3 kidnapped boys. One of them, by the way, one of these teenagers is an American citizen. So nothing that could hamper that. We don't do anything that could hamper that. But we'll divulge this information very soon, and I think the entire world will see the veracity of what I've just said.
Can you tell us, is it telephone intercepts? Is it human intelligence? What do you have?
Well, we have a lot. There's no question about it. But it'll come out.
It's now July 2017, and we're still waiting on that proof. I only bring it up because I haven't seen any journalists or reporters ask Bibi for the evidence he promised.
The terror organization, designated as such by the US State Department, that runs the Gaza Strip.
You know, Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas. So we first indirectly and directly through Israel help establish Hamas. Then we have an election. Then Hamas becomes dominant, so we have to kill them. You know, it just doesn't make sense.
In the first 6 months of 2014, Hamas launched hundreds of rockets at Israeli civilians.
As told by Israeli officials. I noticed how he was unable to mention anything about casualties or any wounded.
Blame the Arabs. That's the name of the game. So anytime that there's a problem that comes up in society, it can be blamed on Arab folk. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So what are causes of death in Israel? You know, we think of Israel in our imagination as a place of war and a place of terrorism, and certainly that is the case, but it's somewhat magnified in our perception. In reality, causes of death in Israel are similar to most Western countries, various diseases. You have to go down to the 70th or 80th cause of death to get to, you know, death because of war, death because of terrorism. In fact, it's much greater chance of dying in a car accident in Israel than being the victim of a terrorist attack or a military attack.
After repeated warnings from Israel to stop, the Israeli Air Force finally conducted precision strikes to halt the rocket fire.
You cannot justify the bombing of residential areas, the slaughtering of children, as justifiable as Israel has a right to defend itself. This is a war crime. It's clearly a war crime. You should be ashamed of yourself if you try to justify it by claiming Hamas's pathetic rockets, which again have killed 1/10 of the amount of Israelis, as Israel has killed Palestinians just in the past week alone, over 13 years, if you think that that is a justified response for Israel to be conducting these airstrikes.
And the IDF advanced into Gaza to destroy a network of terror tunnels that Hamas had constructed to attack Israeli communities near the Gaza border.
At one point, somebody from Gaza sent me a message asking me if I would consider coming in through the subway.
Which is the tunnels?
Yeah. And I said yes.
From the Egypt side?
Yes. The tunnels are only from the Egypt side.
Okay. But there are tunnels going into Israel?
No, never have been.
Never?
Never. The tunnels are from there's the strip of land that the Gaza border with Egypt is very small. It's maybe 7 miles or something. It's very narrow. But because of the siege and because 2 million people live there without access to food, water, or medicine, or anything really, everything had to go through tunnels. So there were some tunnels that were created for pedestrians. There were over 1,000 tunnels at one point because that's the only way to bring in anything, food, money, you name it.
The IDF took extraordinary measures to give Gaza civilians notice of targeted areas, dropping millions of leaflets, broadcasting radio messages, sending texts, and making tens of thousands of phone calls. Let me repeat that. The Israelis called Gazans on their cell phones and told them to leave their residences and move to safety. Never in the history of warfare has an army phoned its enemy and told them where they're going to drop their bombs.
Evacuate to where? Have you seen Gaza? It's this, Israel blocked this border, Egypt blocked this border. Were they supposed to swim for it?
Many IDF missions that could have taken out Hamas military capabilities were aborted to prevent civilian casualties, increasing the risk to Israeli citizens and soldiers. Despite all of this, of course innocent civilians were killed. Every war is chaotic and confusing, and mistakes are frequent. But mistakes are not war crimes. Hamas, on the other hand, committed war crimes as official government policy. Hamas deliberately positioned its military assets among the civilian population, hiding weapons in schools and hospitals.
You say that it's, you suspect it's a white phosphorus or white phosphorus shells that have been used here. Now, that's quite an accusation to make, given that the use of these shells is restricted under international law.
Well, it's not the time with our building in flames to discuss the niceties of international law. We are desperately trying to battle these flames and put them out. As I say, conventional fire extinguishers will not work. We need sand, which we don't have in quantities. What we need to do is for the Israeli army to hear our call. We're on the phone to them constantly in real time, asking them to call off their fire. The humanitarian workers have been killed. They're now surrounded, in a compound which has one building on fire. So, yet again, we have to say that this 3-4 hour pause, lull, whatever, is wholly inadequate. We have to pre-position aid so that we can be fully functional when it starts. But of course, now that our compound has a building on fire in it, our vehicles are interrupted, our convoys are interrupted. So yet again, the ordinary people of Gaza, so dependent, the needy, the sick, the dying, the wounded, so dependent on our aid, are yet again finding themselves engulfed in this ever-deepening humanitarian crisis.
And placing rocket launchers alongside apartment buildings, then forced those civilians to stay in areas they knew would be attacked. They also instructed their people to report the lie that every Gazan killed was a civilian, even if they were actually fighters. And if there were no civilian deaths, Hamas made them up. Numerous internet sites show Palestinians elaborately staging sniper victims and smashed ambulances, among other phony horrors. It's so common, there's even a term for it, Pallywood. As in Palestinian Hollywood. Ironically, it's the leaders of Hamas themselves who best understand the extraordinary measures the IDF will take to protect innocent civilians. They take full advantage of Israel's decency
שומעים אותי גם? יופי. מה רוצים לצלם פה? חיות, דיסקאברי. כל רמאללה זה ג'ונגל, יש שם קופים, כלבים, גורילות. הבעיה שהחיות עכשיו סגורות שם, הם לא יוצאות. מה? לא, אנחנו בני אדם, הם חיות. להם אין צלם אנוש, לנו יש. זה ההבדל בין... מה? תצלם, אכפת לי, אני חושבת, למישהו נראה לך. אני גם הרמטכ"ל יראה.
and adherence to the laws of war.
The book, called the King's Torah, contains quotations from the Talmud, a scholarly Jewish text, to which the rabbi adds his own opinions and interpretations. In a chapter entitled The Killing of Gentiles in Wartime, the rabbi writes, "In any circumstances where the presence of a Gentile causes danger to Israel, it is permitted to kill the Gentile." In addition, he says, in cases where there is a strong suspicion that someone will continue persecuting Jews, it is permissible to kill him, even if at this moment he is not actively persecuting.
No army takes such risks in order to protect civilians as the Israeli army does. I say this as a professional soldier. I say it because it's true. And people who care about truth should know it. I'm Colonel Richard Kemp for Prager University.
It's not reported how many shekels PragerU gave him for this, but one can only imagine it's a lot.